Well, thanks for having us. We just love the opportunity to be here today. I'm Dave Summers, and I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence here in Colorado Springs. And my cohort.
I'm Tammy Sales. Again, I'm the El Pomar Nonprofit Resource Center Librarian with Pikes Peak Library District.
And this is just a real pleasure for us to come out and go out into the community and provide some information and background in terms of the nonprofit sector, in terms of the work that we do. And we want to do what we can to make sure this is the most relevant to you. So I think a couple of things we'll do is I was going to start off tonight and talk a little bit about the local nonprofit sector, give you kind of an overview of what happens here in Colorado Springs, talk a little bit about why nonprofits, what kind of careers there are in nonprofits, what's the economic impact of the nonprofit sector here. And then I'll kick it over to Tammy, and Tammy will tell you about some of the resources that you can tap into at the library. Come on in.
Oh, no,
That's all right. Anything else, Tammy?
No, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for question and answers, but I'm sure I can speak to Dave when I say if you have a question while we're both doing our thing, you're welcome to ask it at that time.
And we're going to go back and forth a bit too, because I appreciate Tammy jumping in when I suppose I play myself. And, Tammy, what do you think? And she'll jump in. So, I looked at the syllabus that you have for this class, and I realized, for me, I would want to know some things before I got into the grant writing, like, what is a nonprofit? What is a nonprofit and why do nonprofits exist? And I don't know if you even got into that, so I'm going to throw that out to you. What is a nonprofit and why do they exist? Yes?
So nonprofit is an organization that has received designation through the IRS tax code as a 501c3, or it can be C4 or C6, etc., but most often it's 501c3. And they exist as a third sector in addition to the private and public sector or government sector, and they often fulfill a lot of holes that are made with social needs and trying to bridge those gaps for a lot of communities.
Awesome.
Yes.
She avoided my trap.
Yeah.
She avoided my trap. Because one of my questions was going to be, are all nonprofits charitable? No. And how many 501c type organizations are there? There are 29 different ones. There are 29 different ones. And I love it. When we say there's a nonprofit for anything, there really is. You've got a 501c1, 501c2, 501c3. We've got credit unions in town that are nonprofits. They're a 501c14. You've got social and recreational clubs, 501c7s. I actually started my career with a 501c6 here in town. That's a trade association, a 501c6. Our local Regional Business Alliance, formerly known as the Chamber of Commerce, is a 501c4. I think they're 501c4. I think they're a C6 as well. Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. I think they might be a C. Some of our foundations in town are C4s, some of them are C3s. One of the differences between what is the main difference between a C3 and a C4? Anybody know?
Tax exempt.
C4 often is allowed to be engaged in political action, and then any donations made to them aren't always tax deductible.
Yeah. You've got the C4s can do more lobbying. Absolutely. And then your donations to a C4 are not generally, I don't think your C4s are tax deductible, but your C3s are for donations. So those are the major differences between those two. How many nonprofits do we have in Colorado Springs? Anybody know?
What was the 29 number you mentioned?
501c1 through 501c29.
Oh my goodness.
There are 29 different types of 501c nonprofit organizations.
Thank you.
Some of the obscure ones, and you wouldn't even think that's a nonprofit. You've got cemeteries, 501c13 cemeteries. You have, I love this one, the National Railroad Retirement Investment Trust gets its very own nonprofit distinction as a 501c28.
National Football League is a 501c6.
Yeah, okay. And then you have the Black Lung Benefit Trust is a 501c21. So lots of different 501c organizations. Are churches we know are nonprofits, but are they 501c organizations?
Not all of them.
Not all of them, not necessarily. They don't have to be 501c organizations to be a church. Those that are, file 990s, and that's one of the things that a 501c3 has to do is file a 990. But those that aren't 501cs, they don't have to file a 990 at all because they aren't exempt, and need that one. I'm doing that. So when we count the number of nonprofits in Colorado Springs, and Tammy and I have this discussion, we generally don't include churches because they're nonprofits, but most of them don't file 990s. So when you look at the number of nonprofits, we often look at the number that file 990s. That's the easiest way to track that information. We have well over 1,400 organizations in this community. I always say it's around 2,000. What number do you use?
I usually say it's almost 3,000, because if you go to the IRS and look for that designation, and then I compare that with how many file their 990.
Okay. Okay. When we did our economic impact study, we were able to find about 1,400 just in El Paso and Teller County. But we know there are a lot more than that because one of the reasons it's hard to track that number is there are a lot of nonprofits that operate here, but they aren't headquartered here in Colorado Springs. They don't file here. So you won't find them in El Paso or Teller County. Some good examples of that would be Penrose Hospital, for example. They're owned by Centura. Centura does not file in El Paso County. So they don't even show up on the records for El Paso County. Other organizations, your national charities, American Heart Association, March of Dimes, American Diabetes Association. Most of those just have branch offices here, but you know that they're here and they're raising tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, in this community that are going back to a national headquarters. So it's a moving target, but we do have a lot. We did an economic impact study through the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. About 47% of the nonprofits that operate here have operating budgets of under $100,000 a year. That's really small when you think about the fact that if you work for one, you want a salary. Okay? So if you're taking a salary and you're working for a nonprofit, that their whole budget is only $100,000, there's not much money left to do anything else. That's why a lot of organizations are so reliant upon volunteers. The volunteers do the bulk of the labor. A lot of those organizations that are $100,000 or less are all volunteer. Or they might have a part-time executive director or a part-time admin person. And even have volunteers doing the grant writing, for example. So, but as a sector, our local sector contributes, and I'm going to get my number wrong. We have one out of every 9 civilian jobs, or 11% in Colorado Springs MSA, the metropolitan statistical area does include Teller County, is directly or indirectly attributable to the nonprofit sector. 1 out of every 9 jobs. That's a lot. That's a lot of folks that are working in the nonprofit sector. And generate over 3.1 billion in revenues in this region. Now, one of the things that we did when we did this study is we were looking at revenue and expenses, and we wanted to know how much of that money also stays in the community. So yes, it's 3.1 million in revenue that's being, did I say million or billion? Billion, thank you. 3.1 billion in revenue, but is that just from you and me? No, 80% of that is new money coming into the community. So that's really important to know. That's because we have organizations here like the Olympic Committee, and all of the sponsorship dollars that you see, the television ads, Oro Wheat, the bread of the Olympic Games, Chevrolet, the car of the Olympic Games, all those sponsorship dollars come to Colorado Springs first, before it gets sent anywhere else. So that's new money that comes into the community. Medicaid and Medicare dollars that are going to Penrose St. Francis. Memorial Hospital is now a nonprofit. Those Medicaid, Medicare dollars are dollars that come to this community, right? So that's part of that revenue. Included in that 3.1 billion, El Pomar itself is a nonprofit as a foundation. So that's their money that they earn, that's counted as revenue that comes to this community. So it's not just the charitable dollars, it's also the foundation dollars. Still, it's a substantial part of our economy, driving jobs, driving programs, driving quality of life in this community. One of the things that I brought to share with you is a directory that we publish.
Here,
You want to do that? Okay. There are about 600 listed in this directory, and this is a directory of nonprofits in the Pikes Peak region. Most of your larger organizations would be in this directory. Some of your national governing bodies for the Olympic Committee are listed in here, but not all. But if you open it up and turn to the back, you will find a listing by type of nonprofit. So when I say there's a nonprofit for anything, you can find historical preservation, civil rights, animal protection, the environment. There's tons of different types of nonprofits. We have a number of nonprofits that do a lot of international work from this community around the world. One that you might be familiar with, it's actually the largest nonprofit in the state, is Compassion International. Anybody heard of them? They're a child welfare or child support agency. They are faith-based, and they're the largest nonprofit in the state of Colorado. They are more than double the size of the Olympic Committee budget. Give you an idea of the perspective. But then you have smaller organizations like international organizations like Engineering Ministries International. They're kind of like Doctors Without Borders. They go into countries overseas and they take on projects like setting up the infrastructure for delivering water to a small community that's never had fresh water. And engineers will do this on a pro bono basis and travel overseas to do that type of infrastructure work. They're here in Colorado Springs. Fabulous program. So that tool might be helpful for you as you are looking at organizations you might be interested in working with, or in any of the research you're doing for class projects. That might be helpful information. At the front, you've got it, but in alphabetical order, with the mission statement. The website, if they have one, so you can go out and you can learn more about the organization. So, another question that I had for you. Who owns a nonprofit? Who owns a nonprofit?
Oh, in general, you're not asking if somebody in here.
Yes, in general.
Okay.
Who owns the nonprofit?
Well,
You ever think about this?
Sort of the board of directors of the site. I mean, they run it. they didn't found it.
One of the classes, they sent the clients of it.
The public owns a nonprofit. That's why you're granted that tax exempt status, is the public is considered the owners of the nonprofit. Board of directors would steward the nonprofit. They are in charge, they are there to represent the public in terms of operating that organization and making sure that it is truly serving, fulfilling the mission of the organization and serving the public good. So, that's who owns it. It's not who operates it. What's interesting in my work at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, I often have people that come to me and they say, I'm going to start a nonprofit. And my nonprofit is going to do this. And my nonprofit is going to do this. And my nonprofit is all about this. And at that point I say, it's not yours. If it's important for you to own and operate that company, then you'd better operate a for-profit. Because at the point you believe it's yours, you're not serving the public good. You're serving yourself. And you need to look at the organization as one with a higher good involved. It's not yours. As a matter of fact, as the executive director, even as a founder, the board of directors has the right to hire and fire. And so this person who is the founder can start that organization and get that board of directors going, and 6 months down the road, the board can say, we don't think you're the right person to run this organization. And they have the right to eliminate that position and bring in a different executive director. So I often say at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, we dash dreams.
I like that. I'm going to start using that too.
Do you think that ought to be our tagline?
Yes.
We dash dreams. Because people come to us and they say, this is what I want to do.
This is what my business is going to look like.
This is what my business is going to look like. And I said, well, what made you think that you wanted to run a nonprofit? And they'll say, well, I didn't have enough money to start a for-profit.
Yes, it's true. This happens.
Wrong answer.
Yeah.
Wrong answer, because quite frankly, it takes money to start a nonprofit. And it can take just as much, if not more, depending on what type of nonprofit you're trying to start. Do you really think to start Peak Vista Community Health Centers, it didn't take startup capital? Penrose Hospital, as a hospital, it took capital. You know, there are an awful lot of nonprofits that took a substantial amount of capital. So one of the things, so when we have these discussions with folks that come to our offices, it's a hard discussion. And one of the ways in which we partner, the center partners with Tammy, is in a nonprofit startup class that we like to teach the community. And talk to them about the resources, and then what are their options? Not just nonprofit, but are there other options to starting a nonprofit? And one of those, when we have folks that come to us, is that it's possible to run a nonprofit program but not be a 501c3. Does anyone know how you do that?
Operate under some other organization.
There you go. Operate under another 501c3 as a fiscally sponsored program. And so, to give you an example, I had a young man that came to me with traumatic brain injury, and his goal was to help others who were disabled find their voice, find their passion through music. And he really wanted to work with other disabled kids and teach them the love of music. And I said, well, is it your goal to be an executive director and be a paper pusher and sit at your desk and fill out 990s, the Form 1023, do the monthly budget? Is that really what you want to do? Or do you want to work with kids? And he said, I want to work with kids. And I said, let me introduce you to Linda Weiss at the conservatory. Because the conservatory has a larger music program in this community but she doesn't have anything over there that works with disabled kids. So we called Linda Weiss and said, is there a match here? Here's a young man who is uniquely positioned to work with the disabled. She said, send him my way. I would love to have that program here at the conservatory. We'll do the back-end administrative work. We'll handle all the finances for him. He can run his program. And that's what he does. It's called a positive note. I don't know if anybody has run into them in the community. They have a wonderful group of kids that will go out and they will play or sing at different events in the community. It's a group of disabled kids. And they're a program of the conservatory that is fiscally sponsored, and it's a separate budget item for the conservatory. And that way he can follow his dream, but he doesn't have to be a separate 501c3 with a separate board of directors. He can operate under their board. Is he a nonprofit? Yes, it's a nonprofit program. And that's unrecognized. So you don't always have to start a separate 501c3 if you can find another organization to align your program. And that's another thing that we like to do at the center. So, a couple of interesting things about that. Fiscally sponsored program is one type of nonprofit. The other one that I would like to introduce you to is something called social enterprise. Have any of you heard of that and know what that is? Are you aware that you can run a for-profit or a nonprofit social enterprise? It's kind of a blend. It's kind of a blend of both worlds. We've got a number of nonprofits in town that run social enterprises. Can anybody name one?
Boys and Girls Club.
What are they doing? It's a social enterprise.
It's called Kids Club 360. And so it's basically, they use the 47% of their AOB is generated from revenue through Kids Club 360. So it's a supplemental, instead of being like at sites, it's almost like a daycare program, essentially. So.
Okay. Oh yeah, Boys and Girls Club.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. I guess I don't always think of that as a social enterprise. Do you think of that as a social enterprise?
No, because I would think,
That's their mission.
when I think of it, a social enterprise, I think of it as there's that business side, but then
Right.
there's a portion, like
Yeah.
Tom's Shoes.
Right.
Right, I mean, that's the biggest
Tom's
example.
Shoes.
That's,
Discover Goodwill
yeah.
here in town.
No? Yeah.
Everybody thinks of them as a thrift store, but actually that's the business that supports what they do. The mission of Goodwill is actually to employ and improve the quality of life of those who are disabled in our community. It just so happens the thrift store and selling the goods in the thrift store helps support and fund that work. Anybody ever gone to the Aspen Point Cafe?
Yes.
Aspen Point Cafe is a social enterprise of Aspen Point, which works with their mission statement. Anybody want to open up their mission statement?
Aspen Point does the mental health,
Mental health.
like regional stuff.
Yeah, they do a lot of that. And their cafe, they employ a lot of their clients there, teach them workforce skills, and then the revenue of the cafe is funded, goes back to help fund the mission of Aspen Point. Another one is Blue Star Recyclers, if you've heard of them. You can actually pay to give them an old VCR, and they'll dismantle it, and they'll sell the scrap, and they'll keep that out of the landfill. And you can do that with your TVs and any of your electronics. And that's a social enterprise that helps fund and pay for the employees, and most of their employees are mentally challenged folks. A lot of them have, they're on the autism spectrum. The folks that have autism are uniquely capable and just love being focused on taking things apart. And they're a population that has been like 90% unemployable in the past, and suddenly there's a job that fits them. And they love it, and they're employed, and it's a way that society can basically give back. Take your electronics to Blue Star Recyclers. It makes you feel good. So, do nonprofits pay taxes? We hear that they're tax exempt, but do they pay taxes?
Yes.
How? How can they pay taxes? You're right, how? What are the ways in which they pay taxes? Payroll taxes?
They will often also have, like city taxes and some property taxes.
And that generally comes under what's called unrelated business income. A nonprofit might be doing something. Let's say a nonprofit owns an apartment building that they rent out to people. And it just happens to be part of it, one of the assets of that nonprofit. That would be considered an unrelated business, and they will get taxed on that. So some nonprofits do pay those types of taxes. And then, of course, there's payroll taxes. And if you have a nonprofit event at a hotel in town that is a fundraiser, the hotel charges you taxes on that because you are selling tickets, you are selling registration for that event, and the nonprofit has to pay the tax to the hotel for the meals. Okay? So there is that as well. Nonprofits in this community, I'm going to look this up because I don't remember the amount of revenue. Nonprofits in this community pay over $91 million in taxes. That's to the city of Colorado Springs, El Paso County, and to the state of Colorado. So, when you hear folks say nonprofits don't pay taxes, we do contribute a lot of money to the tax base. And so, I always like to clarify that, because I think that's important. How am I doing, Tina?
You got, I'll adjust, don't worry.
That's really, I think, one more thing. You want to hand out this?
Yes, I will do that.
When we talk about careers in nonprofits, because there's a nonprofit for just about any type of organization you can think of, from healthcare to animal welfare, it's like, how do you, you've got your executive level positions. You do have folks that might be in charge of what we call development. The word development is the one that is often used in a nonprofit as opposed to grant writing. It's usually a larger job that encompasses all types of fundraising. So I know you're specifically taking a class on grant writing, but if you looked for a job, and one of the places you can look for a job is actually on our website. We've got an extensive job board for the nonprofit sector. But you would look for development officer or assistant development officer. And development would encompass your grant writing. It encompasses your face-to-face asks. Oftentimes development will include anything doing with your mail, any type of building a case for support in the organization. And sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, that is done by the executive director. Sometimes they'll take that development person and they'll include special events, because special events bring in money to the organization. So it's nice to know something about how to run a special event in addition to grant writing. And so both Tammy and I teach different types of grant writing courses through our organizations, and Tammy will talk a little bit about that. But we go at it from the idea of you need to build a case for support. And that case for support is whether you are doing grant writing or a face-to-face ask or a direct mail appeal or any type of fundraising you're doing, you need to have consistency in the type of approach that you're making so that your story doesn't change. So we teach a case for support class. But there are many, yes?
Sorry, so I'm still an undergrad student, actually, and I'm a communications major. So would something in that field be under the umbrella of development as well?
Do you have about communications?
Yeah.
Communications could fall in a couple of areas. My own background, I was trained as a journalist, and I spent over 30 years in the nonprofit sector. My first job at a trade association, I worked on the publication side. And I actually worked on a trade magazine for a number of years, and then some of their journals and publications and things like that. But it was within a nonprofit. They just happened to have that. There's a nonprofit in town called Magazine Publishing International or something like that. So you can find strictly communication type jobs in some nonprofits. Some of your larger nonprofits will have entire departments devoted to communications. USOC, I worked at the USOC for 4 years, and I worked in the communications division. Discover Goodwill has a communications division. Oftentimes your media work in a nonprofit will be in that area. In a smaller nonprofit, they might lump marketing with your grant writing.
Right.
And have anything related to communication of any type in that position, if that makes sense. Yes?
So, you've given us some good kind of general information about nonprofits, but I'm more interested in specifically what CNE does and how you do it.
Okay,
Can you spend a little time on that?
Sure. I sure can. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence, our entire reason for existence is to help strengthen the nonprofit sector. And we do that through leadership classes and leadership development. We call it resource development, which is teaching grant writing. And then advocacy work. We do a lot of advocacy in the community. Advocacy is being the voice for the sector.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I'll give you an example. When about 2 years ago, the whole reason we did this economic impact study was to advocate on behalf of the sector. Because there were conversations happening in the community that were rather negative about the fact that nonprofits were driving business away from Colorado Springs. The belief was specifically that some of our safety net clinics, Marion House, for example, the soup kitchen, was driving business away from downtown. And we said, we don't have any data to show what it means to really help and support this community. And so we did this economic impact study so that we could talk to our business and civic leaders about how collectively as a sector, we improve quality of life in Colorado Springs. And because there's no advantage in just Catholic Charities trying to argue that.
Right.
And all breed animal rescue trying to make that argument. It takes too much of their resources to do that. But if an organization like ours can do that on their behalf, it makes a lot more sense. And so we do advocacy work. We do a lot of convening. We put on an annual conference called Nonprofit Day. We have 17 workshops throughout the day. We bring in nonprofit leaders, corporate leaders, and board members from organizations for a whole day of workshops and training and relationship building in the sector. Throughout the year, we're doing those calls all day long, every day, with folks that are either starting up a nonprofit or they're running into issues with board governance and they want to know how they deal with a particular issue. They're wanting to start up an endowment, for example.
Okay, so do they pay you for that, or is that a...
We charge membership.
Okay.
We do have
And then, so once they have a
Yes.
membership, then they can kind of...
had
follow you.
access,
You're kind of on a retainer. Yeah.
basically, yes.
Okay.
Our revenue comes in primarily through several different buckets. One is membership. We do charge a nominal rate for some of our workshops and seminars. And then we do have to do some fundraising from the foundation community so that we can provide those services that we don't get earned revenue for in terms of advocacy and really being a voice for the sector. Yes?
These workshops and seminars, is it scheduled on your website?
It is. It is. It's right on our website.
And you mentioned listing jobs. Do you list openings for volunteers?
We don't do a listing for volunteers on our website. There are a number of organizations that you can go out to volunteermatch.org and you'll find a lot of the nonprofits in our area like to list their projects through volunteermatch.org.
I also recently saw a nonprofit newspaper. Are you guys behind that?
The
free-
Gazette is behind that.
Okay, and did you encourage them to do that, or do they kind of work with you, or do they?
We've got some conversations going. I've written a couple of articles for them. That's a separate project of the Gazette, and it's something you can find at King Soopers and at the grocery store.
Mhm.
Yeah, and they decided that there was they saw a niche,
I thought that
that
was
they
awesome
could
that
fill.
they did that.
and a lot of that is providing a lot of awareness and PR.
Right,
For
and that
nonprofits
has
in town.
volunteer listings in it, a lot of them.
Yeah, there's some in there as well.
Pick it up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So.
I feel like you're saying.
Oh, thank you,
You're
Tammy.
welcome.
Yeah, right there. There's jobs. There's jobs, and it's really easy to navigate the organization and the position title. So let's see if there are any development jobs, for example, while you're on there.
Okay.
There are, because I just took one.
She
Did
is
you?
the consummate librarian, isn't
Did
she?
you?
She
Who
just
are
wins-
you going to work for?
Ratio housing.
Are you really? Congratulations.
Nice.
They're a fantastic group.
Yeah, I love it. I start on Monday. 'cause
You'll be
it's
working with
Monday,
Kelly?
so I am, yeah.
Oh, Kelly's
Wow,
wonderful.
congratulations, that's awesome.
Way to go.
Wait a minute, I didn't even know you were looking for a job, that's awesome.
That's fantastic.
There's one over there,
Executive fund development manager.
There's a
Okay,
development
Centura
officer
House.
at
Yep.
Centura. That's going to be a high-level job.
Yep, will be.
Yeah. One of the things I think you discussed in your class was how much money you could make as a developer or a grant writer in this town. I thought it might be helpful if I brought some salary information, because really depends on the size organization and how many years of experience. So they break it up into quartiles, and this is a survey that's put out by the Colorado Nonprofit Association out of Denver, and they do a statewide survey. And they do this by focus of service. So in other words, if you're in the arts and culture world, or in education, or the environment, there's one salary structure. If it's organization budget, there's another salary structure. By region, there's another way to slice and dice that. So, for example, we are considered front range in the 25th percentile. It is around $45,000 a year. But if you are in the overall 25th percentile, when they weigh in number of years of experience, type of service, they lump all of that together, the average in the 25th percentile is $44,500, which is still, it's one of the higher paid jobs in a nonprofit. It generally gets higher pay because you're bringing in the money. So you can make up to, in the higher percentiles, in the 75th percentile, you can make up as much as $66,000 a year. Organizations that are 5 million and above in their budgets, the average is around $79,000 a year. I had Tammy hand out the Afp Code of Ethics. One of the reasons I handed that out is that this is an organization that really tries to advocate for ethical behavior in the fundraising industry. So they put out these standards. And one of the standards is to not accept a bonus of any kind if you're fundraising. People who do fundraising should be paid a salary or an hourly rate. You don't get paid a commission. You don't get paid a bonus depending on the size of grant you bring in. Can anyone think why you would get a commission or a bonus for a grant? Why would that be unethical?
Conflict of interest, wouldn't it be?
It might encourage shady dealings with the grant request.
There's actually a really logical reason for this. When you do a grant proposal, does it state that the person's going to get a commission or a bonus? If it doesn't, then you're not being transparent. That's what would make it unethical, is if you're not being transparent to the donor about where the donor's money is going, it would be unethical. So it's really a far more practical reason. Yeah, there are all kinds of reasons you could become unethical, but a very practical level would be the fact that it wasn't in your proposal. And that's because, quite frankly, donors don't want to see it. They really don't. So, and there are other things on that code that you might find very interesting as well. That's about what I have. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Did I answer your questions on C&E?
Yeah,
I appreciate
no, I
you
thought that was
stopping me.
great. I really, yeah, that was awesome to hear about what you do, because your name is bandied, not your personal name, but the organization's name is bandied about. You're like candy from kids, and honestly, I just didn't know what exactly, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, you guys, I didn't know if you went out and like kind of took up best practices.
We teach
from
a lot of best
places.
practices.
But do you get those best practices? Is it a feedback loop? You know, I mean, do these organizations come to you with, oh, hey, we did this and it really worked well, and then you can then kind of implement that in your next class, or do you just do the research and see what the research says, or I don't know, you know, so it's interesting to me.
Another thing that we do is on a monthly basis, by functional area within nonprofits, we convene. So we have a monthly gathering of folks in the development side. We have a monthly gathering of the financial folks,
And so they can
CFOs.
share ideas and brainstorm.
And they share what they're doing, share best practices, and learn from one another, and all boats rise.
Okay.
Because they have an opportunity to share their different ideas.
Okay.
So we do that for volunteer managers, the CFOs, the development folks, the HR folks, and the CEOs.
And do most of the nonprofits in the Colorado Springs area, are they members?
No,
Okay,
no, they are not. We only have about 250 members out
okay.
of those 2,000.
And why do you suppose those who are not members are not members?
Well, when you consider that 47% have budgets of $100,000 a year or less, and they may be an all-volunteer organization, they don't even have the $100 to pay to do that on an annual basis. So we have
So
a
you
lot
think
of
it's a
members.
funding issue?
A lot of it's a funding issue.
And time,
And time.
I would say time, yeah.
Probably time, I would say time more than funding.
Yeah.
Because the people who are all volunteers, I mean, they're spending all their time just
Right.
trying to run what they've got.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But folks like you're going to be working with Kelly, you may have an opportunity to come. Kelly may say, hey, I can't go to Development Roundtable next month. Will you go in my place or come along?
She's never talked to me about that, so yeah.
There you go. We're going to see you there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you just define quickly social enterprise or the characteristics?
Social enterprise is a fairly new model that has come about. I say fairly new. For the mainstream, it's fairly new. Some of these organizations have been doing it for years and years and years. Discover Goodwill and Aspen Point have both been doing it for most of their history. But the term social enterprise came about because more organizations were seeing an opportunity to create almost a side business that would help fund their charitable side. Now, depending on how closely that's aligned to the mission, there may or may not even be an unrelated business income tax. If it is so closely tied to the mission, you don't have to worry about UBIT. If it is, like the group you're talking about in LA, if they're selling products, they may be paying an unrelated business income tax for any shirts or mugs or anything like that that they're doing. So I can't speak to them, but there are organizations that, depending on the level, they'll get into that unrelated business income tax. But again, you've got for-profits that are also doing social good. Tom Shoes, you mentioned, as one. Here in town, we have Mountain Equipment Recyclers as a for-profit. But in many ways, they are a social enterprise because they are advertising that so much of their revenue is being plowed back into the nonprofit community, specifically to fund military-related organizations that are helping our vets. Yes?
Not only that, I went to the social enterprise panel for Color Springs Startup Week, and Mountain Equipment Recyclers was there, and they just opened up a thrift store that you can bring in people from your nonprofit, and the proceeds in the store that day are donated to your organization, so.
Yeah, it's a social enterprise, but it's under a for-profit model.
Exactly.
So there's actually an organization out of Denver called the Social Enterprise Alliance. And we're actually talking about setting up a chapter here in the Colorado Springs area for organizations specifically wanting to focus. Wouldn't that be great?
Yes, I get asked that.
Yeah. Jonathan Liebert
I wanna
is
know.
Jonathan Liebert is on the board at the Social Enterprise Alliance, and he's trying to get things going down here. So, yes.
I'm fuzzy on the definition of unrelated business income. If you have a church that has a bingo program or a food bank that has a rummage sale, that sounds like unrelated business. Would they have to pay taxes on that?
It often comes down to how the IRS looks at it. It's important whenever you're coming up with any type of operation like that, is to check in with legal counsel to see, does it meet a particular test. So when anybody comes to us and they say, I'm thinking about starting a social enterprise, I always encourage them at some point to go and seek legal counsel just to make sure that they've dotted every I, crossed every T, to make sure, is this something that's going to fall under unrelated business income, or can we prove that it's so closely tied to the mission that it's not an issue? Most of your rummage sales inside a church, it's not an issue. Just not an issue. If somebody's got a really robust bookstore that's related to the church, then it becomes more questionable in terms of the amount of revenue they're doing. For example, I know that New Life has a whole separate bookstore from the church. And I think that I don't think that is something that they can run entirely under the church, I'm not sure. Another example of a social enterprise here in town, they don't hire the folks. Energy Resource Center here in town, they are an organization that provides all of your weatherizing, your energy efficiency stuff in low-income housing. Okay, because they discovered if they can improve the energy efficiency of a home, people who are at poverty level or low income tend to live in substandard housing that have higher utility rates. If they can come in and provide the weatherization and provide energy efficient furnace and all of that, now those folks have the money to be able to buy food, to be able to buy the medicine that they need. And it improves quality of life for those folks. That's a non-profit, believe it or not. That has, their reputation has grown for doing such excellent work in the community that other folks in the community that can afford their services are wanting to hire them. And they said, well, we'll do that for a fee, and that'll help fund our mission for the low-income side. Does that make sense? So that's a social enterprise. Okay.
Last question. You mentioned this directory has about 600 organizations in the 10, so there's about 3,000 in the area. Where would you go to find the other 2,400? Is there a master list someplace?
Well, the IRS on their website has, if you want to spend time looking at it, you can search the IRS's website to find out who has filed for a 501c3 in the county. And they'll give you that list, but I wouldn't, to me, it's not a very accurate list, because, you know, nonprofits start and fail, too.
That's why it's another reason it's a moving target.
Yes, and so sometimes they just really don't even exist. You can search for the GuideStar. You can always have a free account at GuideStar, never pay for a GuideStar account. None of you will ever need a paid GuideStar account, but the free one is good enough to at least search that way too. But again, they have to file those 990. And then there's some out there, because you can look on the IRS's site and see if they file 990s or there's a lot of small ones. And certainly we see those
We
when
see
we're
a lot
doing
of,
that startup workshop.
we see, I mean, if any of you go to church, how many of you have folks at your church or your faith organization that are doing missionary work of any type, and they decided to start a nonprofit so that you could give them donations? We got a lot of husband and wife teams
Yep.
throughout this community have started a little nonprofit that basically doesn't go past the kitchen table,
Okay.
so that they can accept donations, so that they can do their workshop in the Philippines.
Yeah,
We see that all the time. And their entire revenue might be $5,000, $10,000 a year. Do you really, I mean,
Who cares? I mean, apart from their mission, who cares about the money exchange, right? It's not, it's a blip on the screen.
it's a
Yeah.
blip, it's a blip. So the IRS counts them as a nonprofit. I tend to think of, you know, that list of 3,000, you can slice and dice it so many
Sure.
ways.
sure.
I'm not gonna take any more time, Tammy, I'm gonna
Okay.
turn it over to you.
All right, I'll get started. One of the best things though about that, I will say, about the Colorado Springs and El Paso County community, there's a lot of heart in this community. You know, because clearly it will always take heart to start that nonprofit, right? So again, I'm with Pikes Peak Library District. We have in the library district this wonderful center called the El Pomar Nonprofit Resource Center. It's located at the Penrose branch. Has anybody been there? Okay, so it's downtown. Dave's been there. It's downtown. It's at the Penrose branch. It's actually located in the Carnegie building, so it's in special collections. And the reason the collection came about is the books originated at the El Pomar Foundation. So years ago, the El Pomar Foundation kept these books, and it was open to anybody who was at a nonprofit. They wanted to know a little bit more about board management, starting a nonprofit, fundraising, etc. Apparently, so I've been told, it was in this little outbuilding at the Penrose house, on this little side path that wasn't cleared very well in the winter time, and you had to have a key, and it was only available when the office was open, so it wasn't very accessible. Now, the El Pomar Foundation, big supporter of the library. At one point, when they were remodeling the Carnegie branch, of course, they supported that remodel. But as part of that, they came to the library and said, you know, we have this great collection of books, and we'd really like to see it accessible to more people. Would you consider taking this collection over and building it? We'll support it, but then it could be accessible as long as the library was open. And so the library agreed to that. So this beautiful room, and there's a wonderful book collection in there. And then aside from that, they also support a couple of databases, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they support the ability for me to bring in some subject matter experts and do some of the workshops that we offer there as well. So, if you want to do any extra reading, like you don't have enough time now with all your classwork, we always have a few more books. I do have your textbooks in our collection, so I was excited that that had already happened. So that's the history of how the collection has come to the library, and I thought we could talk a little bit about what we have to offer and how we could have made your lives a little bit easier at the start of this class. So this is the library's homepage, ppld.org. And if you just remember research, which is over here on the left-hand side, and then nonprofit. And right now I'm really lucky, I get the top of the third column, but you know, things change and it's always in alphabetical order. So again, if you remember research and nonprofit, you'll be able to get to our website. So the first thing it does is come up to our databases, but we're going to come to that last. And I'm going to click on this home page. And this is some information. It gives you the basic information where the Resource Center is. Again, it's at the Penrose branch. And then the hours of operation. So anytime the library is open, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 9, Friday 10 to 6, and Sunday 1 to 5, that room is available for you to use and access. And then it's got other stuff, you know, it talks about some of our resources. But I do periodically, not on a regular basis, so you don't really receive a lot of spam from me, an e-newsletter. That'll include things like upcoming workshops, new purchases that we've made for the library, community events. I usually have C&E events in there too, and some grant deadlines. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for that as well.
What does Book a Librarian get you?
Oh, so Pikes Peak Library District offers Book a Librarian. Let's say, and we get a lot for either, I need some help doing a resume, I need help with a particular computer program, or I need some specific help we're not necessarily offering a class or workshop on, but I really need to sit down with somebody and go through that. And so you can sign up, put in what it is you're looking for, and where you prefer to meet, and then that goes out to the librarians, and it is a librarian you do meet with. It goes out to them, and then they agree to take it, and they schedule a time to meet. So for me, sometimes I get requests for that, but I do one-on-ones if people are interested in starting a nonprofit. We have next January is when our next one is coming up, and so I will meet with them now, and then I can talk to them about coming to the workshop. I always try to encourage that. So you can schedule that at any time. So one of the things that we do, and I have handouts up here. I'm going to force you to take 2 of them, but I have 2 additional ones. And one of them is an actual little bifold that I created on all of the upcoming workshops that we'll have to offer starting in January, February of next year. Okay. The workshops that we do at the library are free. They are basic. Dave talked about, we each do a grant writing session. I do grant writing in a 2-hour session. It is very basic. It is for people who have never sat through a class like this, never even considered it, and have no idea where to even begin. It's very basic. Dave's is a lot more extensive, and you get into better details, and I really like that they talk about other funding mechanisms and that relationship, because that's what's going to boil down to. So that's over there, but it's always on the website, so you can always check it out. You do not have to have a library card to attend any one of the workshops. You don't have to live in the library district. You don't even have to live in El Paso County. 2 weeks ago, I did a workshop, and I had these 2 lovely ladies who drove 3 hours in. They were 7 miles from the Kansas state line to come to the grant seeking workshop because we were the closest location where the databases were for them. So we are open it to anybody, and I think that's a really nice service the library does. So in the Resource Center room, not only do we have the collection of books, and the books cover every nonprofit subject that you can think of. Lots of board management books, lots of fundraising books, social enterprise. I have a couple. I found a reference to 2 more on B Corporation. I'm going to buy 2 of them. I think I get asked it a lot, so I think it's important to have. All kinds of things. The salary survey that Dave talked about, we are also a member. I purchase that every year and have that in that room, so you can always come and take a look at it. We are also a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and as part of that, they have a salary survey too. That's a little more national, but they're both in there as well. So, one of the things that, well, before I do that, I want to back up. The last thing I want to show you is the actual reading list. So somebody prior to me, before I took this job, did this wonderful creation where they just put in the 5 subject areas for the books. And so what's really nice about it, though, is if you want some information on grant writing, you can click on that subject heading, and it actually directly connects to our catalog system, which nobody else's list in the library does this, so I'm really special. And what's really cool about this is, if you're not familiar with our catalog system, So this will tell you proposal writing, effective grantsmanship. Isn't this your textbook right here? Okay. So, but if you look at it, it tells me for proposal writing, I have one available. What you need to remember is to click on the title, because there's actually 2 copies. There is always, any book that's purchased for this collection, there's always a reference book. And that book is always in the LPMR room because it doesn't check out. But I usually try to purchase a second copy that will circulate anywhere within the entire district. Okay. And so it's currently checked out, but you can always place a hold on it. Now you can have a library card, and if you are not a resident of the library district, we still give guest cards, so you can still check out our books. The only thing you won't ever be able to do is use our databases with a guest card. Okay? But that's what you want to make sure you look at and open it up so you can see where that book is. Okay? Because a lot of times the circulating copies are never at Penrose, since I always have that reference copy. So I'm going to go back. We're going to talk about what could have helped you in the beginning. So the library is actually a foundation information network partner with the Foundation Center. So I understand in the beginning when you were starting to look for potential funders that you all got onto the Foundation Center's free site and did a free search for potential foundations that were available. We actually pay for the foundation directory online, and we have the professional subscription, which means we have access to over 150,000 foundations and over 350,000 grants. And this warning thing says right here, we have that available at 3 branches. So we have it at Penrose, we have it at East, and we have it at Library 21C, our new branch up off Chapel Hills. Okay. The 2 databases that we have, you can access online. You have to be at one of those 3 branches. Okay. But any of the computers at any of those 3 branches will allow you access to that. And again, if you don't have a library card, it's not a big deal. They'll give you a guest pass for the day. You can still get into it. If you actually come to the Alpamar Resource Center room, there's 1 computer in there. It's pretty much the only computer we have in the library system that's not locked down, that doesn't require that you sign in with a guest pass. And that's because we do have so many people who come in from out of town to use that. But what I remind people, if you come in and somebody's on the computer, have that conversation with them, how long they think they're going to be there for. If you suspect that somebody has found that computer and is doing nonprofit resource, you can speak to the person at the desk and they will take care of it. Okay? Because sometimes that happens. So I like to tell people so they don't just leave and not use the computer. I'd rather know and have to come down and throw somebody out to make sure you got to use that computer. Because I don't want to lock it up. Okay? So, the 2 databases we have, the Foundation Directory Online. If you come to the library and you decide you want to do more grant research from this point forward, you can do a search. You can limit your search. When I teach how to use these 2 databases, I teach people to stay within 3 parameters. One is area of interest, which is what your nonprofit is working on. One is funding type, and one is location. Okay? And what's nice about it, it has some really awesome features. And if you get to come, you'll really appreciate especially now after you've already done your research. Some of the nice features that it has is you can pull up your list, and it'll allow you to email that list to yourself. So then, if you don't have to spend, I don't expect everybody to spend hours at the library. I expect people to come in, do a down and dirty search, find that list of names, and go back to their offices and do their research when they have time. Okay? And so that's great, because now you have all those names in your email, and you can just Google them, because the majority of them have web pages where you can find your grant information. The other cool thing it will do is, if you found a potential foundation, you can open up its record. It will have copies of its old 990s, So if you're doing that research to find out how much they give on average and who they've given to in the past, you'll have that information there. It will tell you things like its grant deadlines, how they want their applications to come, whether they want it on the website. It'll have website links. It'll have email links if they've provided it. It'll have, for some of the larger foundations who have several different types of grants, it'll list out each different one with a description of it. Okay. And then you have the ability to narrow down your search. So if you only wanted to see who provides funding for animal welfare in Colorado, you can narrow it down to that. Okay. And then if you're on that individual record, it'll allow you to email that as well. So it's a really nice functioning directory. And then the other one we subscribe to is the Colorado Grants Guide, which is put out by the Community Resource Center out of Denver. This is more of a Colorado foundations. So you're going to have some smaller ones that might not necessarily be listed in the foundation directory online. They're definitely more community-based. So that one actually allows you to narrow your search down by the county. So if you were doing fundraising work in Teller County and you want to see who gives in Teller County, you can narrow that search down that way as well. Okay. So those are some of the resources that we have. I would encourage you, if you want to pursue this, please come see me. Come to some of the workshops, they're free. They're early, they're from 8 to 10, but that's because you don't have to pay for parking. And so we try to keep that because, again, I especially see all those kitchen table nonprofits, and they don't have that kind of money. And so I try to talk about how to save them some money, printing and not having to pay for parking, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of our resources. Any questions on that? Go ahead.
What do you mean by funding type?
Funding type? So you can search for, let's see, you want to expand your building, capital improvement. So you could actually search for foundations that give for capital improvement. Okay. You can search for foundations that fund programming. You can even search for foundations that fund operational cost. Okay. And you know, I'm sure you've had that conversation, the difference between programming and operational cost, yes. And so that's how you can narrow that down too. Because if if you're looking for capital funds and they don't fund capital funds, there's no point in them showing up in your search, right? Any other questions? Okay, so one of the things I brought two different things for you.
Can I hand something out for
Will
you?
you do this one? That would be awesome. So the one that Dave has is kind of an instructional sheet, guideline for grantspace.org. And I think I saw on your,
We did a tutorial on that.
yes, that's an awesome site. So that's actually put out by the Foundation Center. And this is their educational tool that they've got. And so I brought that along because I thought it'd be nice that you could see what other options they have. Not only do they have those tutorial videos, but they have tons of examples. And then the other sheet that I have is this one. I kind of went through, I'll move around here. I went through your syllabus and looked up to see what other kinds of things you've talked about. And then I went through and made a list of some of the resources that I like to use for the same subject. And any of you, okay, so I unfortunately don't have LibGuides at PPLD, or I would have done a LibGuide for you. I'd rather not use paper, but it is what it is. But if you want this and have the live links, I'm more than happy to email this to you if you email me and request it. And so you've already gone through, your grant seeking and your grant writing stuff. But I also included a couple of references on here for assessment definitions and how to do evaluations of your program, because you may be required, depending on where you get your funds from, you may have to evaluate the success of the program later on. And then I included some links to some sample documents. A lot of those are grant space links. I really like grant space. I think they've done a nice job of compiling that information. And then I put in there some information on grant management. And I really liked, I'm going to pull this site up. I tried to do the cheater version, so let's see if this will pull it up for me. All right. I'll type it in. Let's see. Strategy. Spaces there.
Manage facts.aspx.
Okay. So I found this. And even though it probably has, it probably has more information on here and more requirements that many of you are going to have to follow, it's a nice visual outline of what you have to do to manage your grant. Okay? So that's on there as well. So, and then as far as other resources go, these are some of the other places that that usually have some sort of blog or weekly e-news that they send out, and I tend to follow to get some additional information, find out what's going on in the nonprofit world, get some additional grant deadlines. A couple of them have really